How one man killed dozens inside US hospitals, and no one noticed. The healer who played God. Subscribe, because the truth that hides behind hospital walls is darker than you think. The air inside Marymount Hospital was too quiet for a Monday morning. Usually, the halls echoed with the shuffle of nurses, the low hum of machines, and the occasional beeping of a heart monitor. But today, silence. The kind of silence that only existed right before something terrible was about to happen. Room 214 was dark, the blinds drawn halfway. A man in a pale green uniform stood beside the bed of an elderly patient named Harold Finch. The man's ID badge caught the faint light from the corridor. Donald Harvey, orderly. He adjusted the patient's oxygen mask, whispering softly, "Don't worry, you'll rest easy soon." Outside, the hospital rain gutters rattled under the storm. Inside, a nurse named Kathy Miller walked past the doorway, pausing for a moment as if something felt off. Donald turned and smiled. A calm, pleasant smile that never quite reached his eyes. Kathy nodded awkwardly and kept walking. Minutes later, the heart monitor flatlined. Donald pressed a button, noted the time, and whispered under his breath, "Another one freed." To anyone else, it was another peaceful death. To Donald Harvey, it was something else entirely. In 1987, detectives in Cincinnati, Ohio, received an anonymous call from a nurse at the Daniel Drake Memorial Hospital. Her voice trembled as she said, "You need to look into one of our orderlies. His patients keep dying. And always when he's around." Detective Samuel Ross, a veteran with 20 years on the force, almost dismissed it. Hospitals were places where people died every day. But there was something about her tone. Controlled panic mixed with certainty. Ross looked up the name she gave him. Donald Harvey. No prior record. No red flags. But when he called the coroner's office, he got silence. Then a long exhale. "You're not the first one asking about him." Harvey had been working in hospitals across Ohio and Kentucky since the 1970s. An unassuming man in his mid-30s, with neatly combed hair, glasses, and the calm voice of someone who'd seen too much suffering. His co-workers described him as helpful, polite, maybe a little strange, but harmless. What no one knew was that Donald kept a private notebook. Inside it, rows of names, some marked with small crosses, others circled. Each one, a patient who had passed peacefully during his shift. Detective Ross visited Marymount Hospital first. He met with Kathy Miller, the same nurse who had felt something uneasy years earlier. "I don't know what it was," she said. "He was quiet, too quiet. He'd talk to the dying patients like he knew something the rest of us didn't." Ross scribbled notes. "You ever see anything suspicious? Missing medication? Unusual activity?" Kathy hesitated. "We thought he was caring. He'd always offer to help them go peacefully. I just thought he meant comfort care. But," she looked away, "sometimes he'd come out of a room smiling and minutes later the alarms would go off." Ross felt a chill run through him. He asked for hospital records, medication logs, death certificates, anything. The stack they gave him was thick enough to fill a box. Over 5 years, Harvey's name appeared again and again beside pronounced dead-at timestamps. Coincidence? Maybe. But Ross had seen enough to know when coincidence felt like cover. Meanwhile, in another part of town, Donald Harvey was cooking dinner in his small apartment. Classical music played softly from a radio. On the counter lay a stack of patient charts, copies he'd taken home for study. He moved with the calm precision of a man who believed in his own ord. He saw himself as a caretaker, not a killer. In his mind, every patient he touched had been suffering. He wasn't ending lives, he told himself. He was relieving pain. A mercy, he called it. But the truth was far darker. He'd learned how to use hospital supplies in ways no one suspected. Cleaning chemicals, injections, food additives, small doses that mimicked natural death, every act methodical, silent, almost ritualistic. And when detectives would one day ask him how many people he had killed, his answer would freeze the room. But that moment hadn't come yet. Detective Ross took the case to Dr. Evelyn Grant, a forensic pathologist known for her sharp intuition. "Hospital deaths rarely get questioned," she told him. "If someone's terminal, there's no autopsy. You could hide 100 killings in plain sight." Together, they examined old files, patient by patient. Patterns emerged. All the deaths had one thing in common: Donald Harvey's shift schedule. In the corner of one report, Ross circled a date. Midnight, May 3rd, 1982. Harvey clocked in. Patient died at 12:15. Cause of death listed as cardiac failure. No toxicology done. Dr. Grant leaned in. And look, another on June 8th. Same floor, same symptoms. Both had meals prepared by staff under his supervision. Ross whispered, "He's hiding behind routine." The breakthrough came from something small: a misplaced autopsy report. One patient, an elderly man named William Holloway, had been re-examined after family complaints. The pathologist found traces of cyanide, a compound not used anywhere in the hospital. When confronted, the head nurse recalled something strange. Donald always carried his own lunch. He'd use the staff kitchen but never shared food. He said he liked to keep things separate. Ross immediately ordered a search of Harvey's locker. Inside, they found cleaning supplies, personal notes, and a small bottle labeled simply, salt. It wasn't salt. That night, Ross sat in his car outside to Harvey's apartment. Rain pattered on the windshield, the city lights blurring through glass. He watched as Harvey carried in 2 paper bags. Groceries maybe. Ordinary. Predictable. Unthreatening. Ross couldn't shake the feeling that this man had mastered invisibility, hiding behind sympathy, kindness, and order. He turned to Dr. Grant's notes in the passenger seat. One line stood out: "Predators who work in care facilities often see themselves as saviors. That's what makes them so dangerous." The next morning, Ross returned to Marymount for follow-up interviews. Word had spread. Staff were whispering, glancing over shoulders. Hospitals thrived on calm. Rumor was a disease. Kathy approached him again, holding a folded paper. "I don't know if this helps," she said, "but I found this in the nurses' lounge. It's Donald's handwriting." Ross unfolded the paper. It was a quote written in neat cursive. "Mercy is not given, it's taken." He looked up at her. "Where did you find this?" "Behind the clock on the wall." Something in Ross shifted then. The case was no longer just about deaths. It was about belief. 2 days later, Harvey was transferred to another facility, Daniel Drake Memorial, after a small management dispute. The hospital board saw him as dependable, efficient, and soft-spoken. No one asked why his patient mortality numbers were unusually high. The new hospital welcomed him like a prized employee. And that was exactly what terrified Detective Ross. He pushed for an immediate investigation, but paperwork delays and hospital politics slowed everything down. No one wanted to believe a caregiver could be a killer. Every night, Ross stared at the wall of evidence in his home office. Photos, reports, patient charts. The pile was growing, but still no proof, just suspicion. Until one day, a janitor from the new hospital came forward. He said he had seen Donald alone in the medicine storage room at odd hours, locking the door from the inside. Ross's instincts kicked in. He filed for a warrant. When police finally searched Harvey's apartment, they found bottles of chemicals, notebooks filled with patient names, and strange handwritten codes. One note read, "Started 1975. God forgives. No one else needs to." Ross exhaled slowly. Started 1975. That meant he'd been doing this for over a decade. Dr. Grant looked over the evidence, her face pale. If this is what it looks like, he's not just a serial killer. He's a system failure. They brought Harvey in quietly. No handcuffs, no shouting, just a calm invitation to assist in an inquiry. He smiled the entire time. Of course, detective. Anything to help. Ross stared at him across the table. We've found substances in your home. Cyanide, arsenic, cleaning compounds. Can you explain that? Harvey folded his hands neatly. I worked in sanitation. You'd be surprised what gets left around. Ross leaned forward. Donald, how many people did you help rest easy? Harvey's eyes softened. Help? Oh, detective. He smiled faintly. I didn't help them. I freed them. Ross felt his stomach turn. Freed? They begged for it, Harvey said quietly. Not with words, with pain. I just listened. For a moment, silence filled the interrogation room. Ross met his eyes, searching for remorse. Found none. Only certainty. Then Harvey tilted his head slightly, as if remembering something. You're looking in the wrong place, detective. The list you have, it's not complete. Ross froze. What list? Harvey smiled wider. The ones from before Cincinnati, the ones from Kentucky. You'll find them, if you know where to dig. Ross turned to Dr. Grant, who stood behind the glass window watching the exchange. She mouthed the words silently. He's confessing. Ross looked back at Harvey. You're saying there are more victims? Harvey leaned forward, voice almost a whisper. Dozens, maybe more. But who's counting really? Hey, all thanked me in the end. Ross's hands trembled slightly. This wasn't a mercy killer. This was a man who believed he'd been chosen. Not by God, but by his own twisted sense of purpose. When Ross left the room, he felt the weight of every name, every chart, every life that had vanished quietly behind hospital curtains. But the worst part wasn't the confession. It was Harvey's final words before they took him away. You should check the old hospital freezer, detective. There's still one left waiting. Ross turned sharply. What do you mean, one left? Harvey smiled that same calm, empty smile. The one who didn't die when I wanted him to. Ross stared through the observation glass as Harvey was led out of the room, that chilling smile still frozen on his face. And in that moment, the detective realized this case had only just begun. The body count, buried in paperwork. The following morning, Detective Samuel Ross sat in his car outside the Cincinnati Police Headquarters, gripping a paper cup of coffee that had long gone cold. He hadn't slept. Harvey's last words echoed in his mind. Check the old hospital freezer. There's still one left waiting. That sentence looped like a ticking clock. A challenge, a taunt, a confession wrapped in arrogance. Ross looked at the dawn creeping over the city. It wasn't comforting. It was clinical, gray, and silent. A new day, but the same nightmare. Inside the station, the briefing room buzzed with nervous energy. Dozens of folders were stacked across the table, each one representing a patient tied to Donald Harvey in some way. The air smelled of stale coffee, cigarette smoke, and the faint metallic scent of copier ink. Dr. Evelyn Grant stood at the front, flipping through autopsy photos with gloved hands. Her tone was professional, but her eyes betrayed exhaustion. In total, we have 75 deaths under review from Marymount, Drake Memorial, and the VA hospital in Lexington, all within Harvey's employment timeline. Detective Reed, one of Ross's colleagues, exhaled sharply. 75? That can't all be him. Dr. Grant looked up slowly. That's what every hospital said too, until the evidence started matching. They started with the freezer. Ross and a forensics team drove to the old VA hospital where Harvey had first worked. The facility had been partially shut down, its corridors stripped of equipment, but still holding the ghostly smell of disinfectant and rust. Down in the basement, 2 maintenance men led them to the morgue. The door creaked open, revealing rows of outdated freezers. Some were empty, but one in the corner was still running, a low hum echoing through the tiled room. Ross exchanged a look with Dr. Grant. "You sure this is it?" She nodded. "This model hasn't been logged in over a decade." The technician pulled open the heavy steel door. Frost spilled into the air like smoke. Inside was a single unclaimed body bag. Dr. Grant leaned in, flashlight trembling slightly in her hand. The tag read, "Patient, 0725, unidentified male." Ross's pulse quickened. "Let's take it in." Hours later, in the autopsy suite, Grant uncovered the truth. The man's tissues showed abnormal discoloration, not consistent with natural causes. Lab results came back 2 days later confirming it. Cyanide poisoning. Ross slammed his palm against the table. He wasn't bluffing. Harvey's words had been a breadcrumb trail, not to tease, but to control. Even from behind bars, he was directing the investigation. Back at the interrogation room, Harvey was calm. Too calm. He greeted Ross like an old friend. "Detective, did you find him?" Ross didn't answer. He simply set the autopsy report on the table. Harvey's lips curved upward. "Good. That one kept me up for weeks. He took too long." Ross snapped, his voice low but shaking with anger. "You poisoned him." "I released him," Harvey said softly. "He was dying anyway. I just made it easier." Ross leaned forward, eyes blazing. "You think you're some kind of angel?" Harvey tilted his head. "No, detective. Angels save souls. I saved bodies." For the first time, Ross felt something he hadn't felt in years. Fear. Not of harm, but of pure emptiness. Harvey wasn't insane. He was certain. The media got wind of the case days later. Newspapers blared headlines like, "The Angel of Death. Hospital killer confesses to dozens." Reporters swarmed the hospital parking lots, sticking microphones into doctors' faces, demanding answers about how one man had killed for over a decade undetected. But inside the department, Ross knew the bigger problem wasn't how many Harvey Keys old, it was how no one noticed. Dr. Grant discovered that many of Harvey's victims were listed as terminal or elderly, meaning their deaths weren't investigated. Toxicology reports weren't standard at the time. Hospitals had closed cases within hours, labeling them natural causes. Grant threw down a file in frustration. He used their own bureaucracy as camouflage. Ross stared at the evidence board. Photos, death certificates, timelines. The pattern was clear now. Each time a supervisor grew suspicious, Harvey quietly transferred hospitals. Each new place welcomed him for his experience and compassion. He was killing under the radar, Ross said grimly, and the system was signing his permission slip. Meanwhile, Harvey's behavior in custody began to change. He started talking, not out of guilt, but because he liked the attention. Reporters described him as soft-spoken, friendly, articulate. He smiled during interviews, occasionally adjusting his glasses and calling his actions mistakes born from mercy. Ross watched one of the taped sessions, jaw tight. "He's performing." Dr. Grant nodded. "He wants control. If he defines the story, he stays the hero in his own mind." But something deeper was happening. During one interview, Harvey mentioned something chilling. "Not everyone I killed was a patient, detective. Some were obstacles." Ross froze the tape. What did he mean by that? Grant frowned. "He's hinting at something beyond the hospitals." Ross felt a chill crawl up his spine. If Harvey's victims included people outside hospital walls, this case wasn't just about medical killings. It was about anyone who got too close. One name appeared in Harvey's notes. James Pelham, a hospital security guard who'd resigned suddenly in 1983. Ross tracked him down in Kentucky. Pelham looked worn out, living in a rundown trailer off a country road. When Ross introduced himself, Pelham went pale. "You're here about Donald, aren't you?" Ross nodded. "You knew him." "Knew him?" Pelham's voice shook. "I warned them. Back in '83, I caught him in a supply room with a syringe that wasn't logged. He told me it was for personal use. When I tried to report it, administration told me to drop it, said he was too valuable." Ross leaned forward. "What happened after that?" Pelham looked away. "A week later, I started getting sick. Food poisoning, they said. But I never ate hospital food again." Ross's expression hardened. "You think he tried to silence you?" Pelham nodded slowly. "I know he did." Ross brought the information to the district attorney. It was enough to file multiple homicide charges spanning 3 states. But bureaucracy reared its head again. State lines meant different jurisdictions, overlapping claims, and endless paperwork. Harvey, sitting in his cell, watched it all unfold on the evening news with a faint smile. In one letter sent to the police department, written neatly in blue ink, he taunted, "The truth is like infection, detective. You can treat the symptoms, but it always spreads." Ross crumpled the letter in his hand. "He's mocking us." Grant replied, "He's testing how far we'll go." The deeper they dug, the more horrifying the timeline became. Harvey had worked in at least 5 medical facilities between 1970 and 1987. At each one, the death rate spiked by up to 40%. But here's what chilled Ross most. None of the hospitals wanted to go public. Instead, they quietly settled claims with families, issued vague statements, and erased his employment records. To protect their image, they buried the truth. Ross stood in front of the evidence wall, furious. He didn't act alone. The whole system helped him, not knowingly, but by looking away. Grant looked at him grimly. That's what makes him unstoppable. Every time he was transferred, they handed him fresh victims. Late one night, Ross went back through Harvey's confiscated notebooks. They were meticulous. Each entry dated, the names of patients, symptoms, cause of death, and the word complete, written in small block letters beside each one. But on the final page was something different. A list of staff names, not patients. Some were crossed out, others circled. Ross froze when he saw one of the uncrossed names, Kathy Miller, the nurse who'd first sounded the alarm. His stomach dropped. Oh no! He grabbed his coat and ran to the car. At Marymount Hospital, the night staff looked up as Ross stormed through the door. "Where's Kathy Miller?" "She's not here tonight, detective," the clerk said. "She called in sick." Ross's heart pounded. He called her home. No answer. He tried again. Still nothing. He drove to her small apartment on Vine Street, the rain turning the city into a blur of lights and reflection. When he reached her door, it was slightly open. "Kathy?" Silence. Inside, the living room lights were off, but a faint blue flicker came from the television. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant. On the kitchen counter sat a note. Handwritten, neat, precise. Ross stepped closer. The words were short. "She wanted to sleep. I helped her." His pulse surged. He turned toward the bedroom and froze. Lying on the bed was a single hospital tag placed carefully on the pillow. No body, just the tag. He picked it up. It read, Zashchud 0786. Mercy. Ross clenched the tag in his hand. Harvey was behind bars. So who had left this? He looked around the apartment and noticed something small. A cleaning supply bottle on the counter with the hospital inventory sticker. Ross whispered, "He has someone on the outside." He called Dr. Grant immediately. "Evelyn, we've got a problem. There's another one." "Another what?" "Another Harvey." Her voice went quiet. "You mean a copycat?" "No." Ross said, staring at the tag in his hand. An apprentice, the copycat, inside the ward. Rain smeared across the windshield as Detective Samuel Ross sped through the dark Cincinnati streets. The hospital tag lay on the passenger seat beside him. And at Dassault 786, Mercy. Every word in Harvey's confession now felt like prophecy. He had said the infection would spread. By the time Ross reached the station, Dr. Evelyn Grant was already there. Her face was drawn, her eyes hollow from nights without sleep. "You're sure Harvey didn't have outside contact?" she asked, pacing. Ross dropped the tag on the desk. "Someone's continuing his work. Maybe someone from the hospitals he trained." Grant nodded grimly. "I've seen this before. Not the killing, the psychology. They admire him. He gave them a belief system disguised as mercy." Ross rubbed his temples. "So now we're not hunting one murderer. We're hunting a legacy." That morning, they rechecked Harvey's correspondence from prison. The warden confirmed that he'd received dozens of letters. Fans, curious students, and even a few medical workers who claimed they understood his compassion. Grant read one aloud, her voice heavy. "You were brave enough to do what doctors can't. One day, I'll follow your example." No return address, no name, just a small drawing in the corner, a pair of angel wings. Ross felt his stomach turn. He inspired someone. Grant whispered, "Or several." The next break came from the forensics lab. The hospital sticker on the cleaning bottle from Kathy Miller's apartment matched supplies from Drake Memorial Hospital, Harvey's last workplace. Ross clenched his jaw. That's where he started talking about discipleship, remember? He used to call himself the quiet teacher. They pulled the staff list. Dozens of names. Orderlies, nurses, maintenance crew. Harvey had contact with nearly all of them. One name stood out. Ray Callahan. Orderly. Late 30s. No. Record. He'd worked every night shift Harvey had, and had requested reassignment after Harvey's arrest. Ross pointed at the file. "There's our lead." At Drake Memorial, the fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead as Ross and Grant walked the hallways. Nurses whispered behind clipboards. The once bustling hospital now felt like a mausoleum. Too clean, too quiet. A supervisor led them to the storage level, where Callahan now worked inventory. He was a tall man, thin, polite, with a hesitant smile that didn't quite meet his eyes. "Detective," he greeted softly. "I heard about Donald. Tragic man, really. Misunderstood." Ross studied him. "You knew him well?" Callahan nodded. "He trained me, taught me how to handle patients, said most of them didn't need medicine. They needed mercy." Grant's tone was measured. "Mercy how?" He smiled faintly. "In doses." Ross's gut tightened. "We'll need to ask you a few questions downtown." Callahan shrugged lightly. "Of course, detective, but you'll find I'm nothing like him." They never made it to the station. Halfway through the corridor, Callahan slipped away. 1 second he was walking ahead. The next, gone through an unmarked service door. Ross cursed, running after him. "Security! Lock down the basement!" The halls below twisted like a maze. Dim lights, humming generators, the distant hiss of sterilization machines. Ross's flashlight beam caught movement. A shadow darting into the pharmacy wing. He followed, breath sharp in his throat. At the end of the corridor, Callahan stood beside a rolling cart. On it, rows of vials glimmered under fluorescent light. He looked calm, almost serene. "You shouldn't have come here," Callahan said softly. "He told me this day would come." Ross steadied his gun. "Ray, put your hands where I can see them." Callahan didn't move. "He said they'd never understand our work. He said the pain in this world is louder than the cure." Ross took a slow step forward. "Donald Harvey lied to you. You're not saving anyone." Callahan smiled faintly. You think death is the end? It's silence, detective. It's peace. He gave it to them. I'm just continuing the treatment. Ross lunged as Callahan reached for the cart. Vials crashed to the floor, shattering. A cloud of chemical mist hissed up. Ross coughed, pulling him down hard. When the security team arrived minutes later, Callahan was in cuffs, his eyes distant, murmuring the same phrase again and again. Mercy through silence. 2 days later, Dr. Grant stood in the evidence room, staring at boxes labeled Harvey Case, Closed. Ross joined her quietly. They confirmed it, he said. Those vials contained cleaning compounds mixed with sedatives. Same method, same pattern. Grant closed her eyes. He didn't just create victims. He created believers. Ross leaned against the wall, exhaustion in his voice. There could be more. People he talked to, letters he sent. Grant nodded. We can't prove how many followed him, but his idea spread faster than anyone realized. A week later, Ross returned to the prison to see Harvey one last time. The guards led him into a cold visiting room. Harvey was thinner, older, but the same faint smile lingered. Detective Ross, he said softly. You found my student, didn't you? Ross slammed the case file on the table. You didn't just kill patients. You trained someone to keep killing. Harvey looked genuinely curious. Did I? Or did they train themselves by watching the world ignore suffering? Ross leaned closer, voice trembling with anger. You're not a savior. You're a coward who hid behind compassion. Harvey chuckled. We all hide behind something. You behind your badge, doctors behind their prescriptions. Me? He smiled faintly. Behind mercy. Ross stood, shaking his head. You'll die in this cell, Harvey. Harvey's eyes glinted. Maybe, but you'll still see me in the reports. That night, as Ross drove home, a breaking news alert came over the radio. Inmate Donald Harvey found dead in prison cell. Suspected poisoning. Ross gripped the wheel tightly. You've got to be kidding me. Grant called moments later. They think he was attacked by another inmate, but there's something strange. The substance used was the same compound he preferred. Cyanide. Ross exhaled slowly. He taught it to someone even in there. Grant's voice was quiet. It's over for him, but maybe not for what he started. Months passed. The hospitals tried to move on. Laws changed. Stricter medical oversight, tighter toxicology testing, new ethics boards. But in the quiet hours of the night shift, some nurses still whispered his name. The Angel of Death. Ross visited the graves of victims one spring afternoon. The sky was pale, and wind rustled through the trees. He placed a small note on one of the headstones. The first patient Harvey had confessed to helping. It read, We found the truth. Too late. But we found it. He turned to leave, but something on the headstone caught his eye. A fresh flower. White lily. No card. He froze. No one visits this grave, he murmured. Grant called later that evening. You'll want to see this, she said. A nurse from another hospital just reported suspicious deaths. Same signs, same methods. Ross closed his eyes. Another one? Grant sighed. Looks that way. The infection's spreading again. He stared out at the fading sunset. The city skyline shimmered under the dying light. Peaceful, unaware. You can arrest a man, Ross said quietly. But you can't arrest an idea. The phone line went silent. Only the hum of traffic and the echo of thunder in the distance remained. Ross slipped the hospital tag number 0786 back into his pocket, a reminder of the case that never truly ended. And as he drove off into the night, the radio played one last haunting newsline. Authorities are investigating a new string of unexplained deaths across multiple hospitals. Some are calling it The return of the angel. The wipers beat against the windshield as Ross whispered under his breath, "Mercy never dies." If you thought this story was intense, you're not ready for the next one. Subscribe before the next case drops. The next truth might already be happening near you.